In The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, there are three brothers, Dmitri, Ivan, and Alyosha. Each of these brothers starts with a certain attitude towards God. Each brother then undergoes some trauma, sending them on a transformative journey of the soul and their relationship with God. Dmitri puts this into words. The devil is struggling with God, and the battlefield is the human heart. Part 1. Ivan's Theory. Ivan makes his attitude about God very clear. In the chapter, Why is Such a Man Alive?, we are exposed to Ivan's theories for the first time through a man named Fyodor Alexandrovich. Quote, every separate person who believes neither in God nor in his own immortality, the moral law of nature ought to change immediately into the exact opposite of the former religious law, and that egoism, even to the point of evil-doing, should not only be permitted to man, but should be acknowledged as the necessary, the most reasonable, and all but the noblest result of his situation. Ivan sees God as a social construct that has no objectivity. He believes there are no objective or natural laws about morality and man's concern for his fellow man. And thus, if a man can reject the idea of God, then no moral boundaries constrain him from pursuing his interests. The elder Zosima then diagnoses Ivan's soul and correctly predicts his future. Quote, the question is not resolved in you, and there lies your general grief, for it urgently demands resolution. Although Ivan's arguments are very well articulated, and he can beat any man in a debate, he is still unsure within himself. In the chapters The Brothers Get Acquainted, Rebellion, and The Grand Inquisitor, Ivan sits down with his brother Alyosha and speaks for himself on his beliefs and theories about God. A question that often torments young men around Ivan's age is why an omnipotent and benevolent God allows suffering in this world. The common Christian answer is that we should not question God's method of manifesting paradise, and that all the suffering will make sense when we reach his paradise. Ivan believes the price paid for this paradise is too great. He proclaims, I do not accept this world of God's. In the moment of eternal harmony, there will occur and will be revealed something so precious that it will suffice for all hearts, to allay all indignation, to redeem all human villainy, all bloodshed. It will suffice not only to make forgiveness possible, but also to justify everything that has happened with men. Let all of this come true and be revealed, but I do not accept it and do not want to accept it. Ivan believes that the suffering in the world is too great and that he will reject any future eternal harmony on this basis. He chooses to take the suffering of kids as his main example. He talks about soldiers throwing babies onto bayonets in front of the mother, of how a mother locked her daughter in a shed overnight, and how a general had a boy torn up by his dogs. His concluding argument is this. Listen, if everyone must suffer in order to buy eternal harmony with their suffering, pray tell me what have the children got to do with it? And if the suffering of children goes to make up the sum of suffering needed to buy truth, then I assert beforehand that the whole of truth is not worth such a price. And therefore I hasten to return my ticket, and it is my duty, if only as an honest man, to return it as far ahead of time as possible. According to Ivan, the world is such a horrible place that there can be no higher harmony. There is no virtue, no light in the darkness. Ivan scorns God. Even if he were shown the light, he vows to reject it. So far, this seems like pure nihilism. Alyosha offers a way to make meaning out of the suffering. Jesus Christ gave his blood to pay for all the evil Ivan described. But Ivan rejects Christ and offers an alternative meaning in his poem, The Grand Inquisitor. This poem is set in Catholic Spain during the reign of the Spanish Inquisition. To start the poem, Christ has returned to earth and performs miracles for the people of Spain. However, the Grand Inquisitor has Jesus arrested and put in a cell. Most of the poem is the Grand Inquisitor's polemic directed at Christ, who sits in silence. It should be noted that Ivan is in agreement with the Inquisitor because afterwards, he tells Alyosha that the Inquisitor joined the intelligent people. The Inquisitor says that Christ should have taken the devil's 3 temptations. If he had, he would have been able to secure the peaceful devotion of all people under Christ. Christ would have been able to feed everyone, he would rule everyone, he could show his mystery to them, and so everyone would be forced to follow him. For nothing has ever been more insufferable for man and for human society than freedom. But do you see these stones in this bare, scorching desert? Turn them into bread and mankind will run after you like sheep, grateful and obedient, though eternally trembling lest you withdraw your hand and your loaves cease for them. In not doing so, Christ insisted on voluntary faith, which most humans cannot achieve. Most men are not able to forego earthly bread for heavenly bread. Only a select few will be able to follow Christ's demands. Thus Christ acted arrogantly and selfishly by insisting that people have to choose him rather than forcing them. By doing so, Christ acted as if he did not love mankind. Quote, "Did you forget that peace and even death are dearer to man than free choice in the knowledge of good and evil?" And so, instead of a firm foundation for appeasing human conscience once and for all, you chose everything that was unusual, enigmatic, and indefinite. You chose everything that was beyond man's strength, and thereby acted as if you did not love them at all. So therefore, the Inquisitor is on the side of Satan. But the Inquisitor insists that Satan is best for humanity. He will accept the temptations of Satan and put them to good use. "I do not want your love, for I do not love you. Listen, then. We are not with you, but with him. That is our secret. We took from him what you so indignantly rejected, all the kingdoms of the earth. We took Rome and the sword of Caesar from him, and proclaimed ourselves sole rulers of the earth. So now the church will have to provide for the people what Christ rejected, and in that way they will enslave the people. They will unite all people under their banner in the manner Christ should have, and save them from the freedom Christ forced upon them. They will provide for them, and utopia will ensue. Oh, there will be centuries more of the lawlessness of free reason, of their science and anthropophagy. For having begun to build their Tower of Babel without us, they will end anthropophagy. And it is then that the beast will come crawling to us and lick our feet and spatter them with tears of blood from its eyes. With us everyone will be happy, and they will no longer rebel or destroy each other as in your freedom everywhere. We will prove to them that they are feeble, that they are only pitiful children, that a child's happiness is sweeter than any other." So Ivan rejects Christ for forcing us to have freedom because we have chosen evil and suffering. This freedom has led Ivan to the despair that Elder Zosima talked of. He is on the side of Satan and sees world domination as a higher ideal than virtue. When Ivan is done speaking, Alyosha questions how Ivan can exist with such darkness in his heart. Ivan responds that one thing keeps him going: pursuing his own interests with no moral bounds. Is it possible with such hell in your heart and in your head? No, you're precisely going in order to join them. And if not, you'll kill yourself. You won't endure it. There is a force that will endure everything, said Ivan, this time with a cold smirk. What force? The Karamazov force. The force of Karamazov baseness. To drown in depravity, to stifle your soul in corruption, is that it? That too, perhaps. Only until my 30th year, maybe I'll escape it. And then? How'll you escape it? By means of what? With your thoughts, it's impossible. Again, in Karamazov fashion. You mean everything is permitted? He grinned crookedly. Yes, perhaps everything is permitted. So Ivan concludes that we should leave the idea of God behind, because he has left us with nothing but suffering. And if there is no God, there is no universal love for mankind, there is no punishment or reward according to traditional morals, and one can only get from life what one takes. And he intends to take what he likes because all is permitted. Part 2. Ivan's Theory and Action. So Ivan has this theory that there is no God, so all is permitted to him. But how does he implement this theory? Ivan has many motives for allowing the murder of his father. For one, if his father were to die before marrying, he will get 40,000 rubles, which is a fortune. He also has a deep loathing for his father, which stems from his abandonment since childhood and his father's drunken, depraved lifestyle. After Dmitri assaults their father and nearly kills him, Ivan says this to Alyosha. Quote, "Viper will eat viper, and it would serve them both right." Later, Ivan is talking with the family servant and illegitimate son of Fyodor, Smerdyakov. Smerdyakov tells Ivan that all the members of the house will be unable to protect Fyodor from Dmitri, and that Dmitri knows how to get into Fyodor's room. Smerdyakov then invites Ivan to go away to another town. He's essentially telling Ivan, the scene is set for murder, all you have to do is leave. Smerdyakov says, "But if your father was to die now, while none of that has happened, sir, then each one of you would get a sure 40,000 all at once, even Dmitri Fyodorovich, whom he hates so much, because he hasn't made his will, sir. All of that is known perfectly well to Dmitri Fyodorovich." Something twisted, as it were, and twitched in Ivan Fyodorovich's face. He suddenly blushed. "And why, after all that," he suddenly interrupted Smerdyakov, "do you advise me to go to Chermashnya? What do you mean to say by that? I'll go, and that is what will happen here?" Ivan Fyodorovich was breathing with difficulty. "Exactly right, sir," Smerdyakov said quietly and reasonably, but keeping his eyes fixed on Ivan Fyodorovich. Ivan then spent the whole night deciding his father's fate. Remembering this night long afterwards, Ivan Fyodorovich recalled with particular disgust how he suddenly would get up from the sofa and quietly, as though terribly afraid of being seen, open the door, go out to the head of the stairs, and listen to Fyodor Pavlovich moving around below, wandering through the downstairs rooms. He would listen for a long time, 5 minutes at a stretch, with a sort of strange curiosity, holding his breath, his heart pounding. And why he was doing all that, what he was listening for, he, of course, did not know himself. All his life afterwards he referred to this action as loathsome, and all his life, deep in himself, in the innermost parts of his soul, he considered it the basest action of his whole life. Remember that this is Ivan's most base action of his life because this was the moment he decided on having his father killed. But why is it base? Ivan himself insists that all is permitted. The next morning, Ivan decides to leave. He reports this to Smerdyakov. Quote, "You see, I'm going to Tremashnia," somehow suddenly escaped from Ivan Fyodorovich again, as the day before it flew out by itself, accompanied by a kind of nervous chuckle. He kept remembering it for a long time afterwards. "So it's true what they say, that it's always interesting to talk with an intelligent man," Smerdyakov replied firmly, giving Ivan Fyodorovich a penetrating look. Remember that Ivan referred to the Grand Inquisitor as intelligent. Here an unspoken understanding is made between them. Ivan is consenting to allow Smerdyakov to murder his father, although it will take Ivan a very long time and a lot of suffering to admit this. Part 3. Crime and Punishment. As soon as Ivan leaves the town, he was expecting relief. He was leaving his father whom he hates, his brother whom disgusts him, and Katerina Ivanovna with whom he had a failed love affair. However, his consciousness already cries out in protest for the sin he just committed. Quote, "Away with all the past, I'm through with the old world forever, and may I never hear another word or echo from it. To the new world, to new places and no looking back." But instead of delight, such darkness suddenly descended on his soul, and such grief gnawed at his heart as he had never known before in the whole of his life. He sat thinking all night, the train flew on, and only at daybreak, entering Moscow, did he suddenly come to, as it were. "I am a scoundrel," he whispered to himself. After this, about 300 pages passed before we see Ivan again. In that time, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov was murdered by Smerdyakov. However, Dmitri is taken as the main and only suspect. 5 days after the murder, Ivan visits the town of the story. Dmitri insists on Smerdyakov's guilt, and so Ivan goes to see Smerdyakov. In fact, he goes to see him 3 different times over the course of 3 months. Over these 3 visits, we see Ivan's soul change. At first, he is in complete denial about his guilt. Then he becomes convinced that he indeed did desire his father's death. Finally, he knows he is guilty of murder. During the first visit, Smerdyakov betrays nothing, and Ivan leaves reassured of Mitya's guilt. A few days after Ivan's first visit with Smerdyakov, Ivan recalls that night when he was listening to his father's footsteps, his basest, most vile action. He begun to doubt himself again. He sees Alyosha in the street while having these thoughts. Ivan, and everyone else, values Alyosha's opinion because he always tells the truth and has a pure heart. Ivan asks, quote, "But didn't you also think then that I was precisely wishing for viper to eat viper, that is, precisely for Dmitri to kill father, and the sooner the better, and that I myself would not even mind helping them along?" "Forgive me, I did think that too at the time," Alyosha whispered and fell silent. After this, Ivan goes straight to Smerdyakov in a rage. He enters in conversation with Smerdyakov in a way that permitted nothing but plain language. So Smerdyakov gave it to him. "I meant that maybe you yourself were even wishing very much for your parents' death then." Smerdyakov tells Ivan what he already knows deep in his soul. Ivan becomes fully convinced, quote, "And again for the 100th time he recalled how, on that last night at his father's, he had eavesdropped from the stairs, but this time he recalled it with such suffering that he even stopped in his tracks as if pierced through. Yes, it was what I expected, it's true. I wanted the murder, I precisely wanted it. If it was he who killed him, and not Dmitri, then of course, I am a murderer too." So the veil is pulled back for Ivan. He was deciding his father's fate that night on the stairs, and decided to murder him. Now Ivan's guilt depends on if it was Smerdyakov or Dmitri who killed him. 2 months later, Ivan returns to the town again on the eve of Dmitri's trial. He passes Alyosha in the street, and Alyosha says it was not Dmitri who killed father. Ivan says, "Who then?" Alyosha then says something that it seems God put into his heart to say. "You've said it to yourself many times while you were alone during these 2 horrible months," Alyosha continued as softly and distinctly as before. But he was now speaking not of himself, as it were, not of his own will, but obeying some sort of irresistible command. "You've accused yourself and confessed to yourself that you and you alone are the murderer. But it was not you who killed him. You are mistaken. The murder was not you. Do you hear? It was not you. God has sent me to tell you that." Suddenly Ivan began shaking all over and gripped Alyosha hard by the shoulder. "You were in my room," he uttered in a raging whisper. "You were in my room at the night when he came. Confess. You saw him, didn't you?" Here, Ivan inadvertently admits that he has been visited by visions of the devil while away in Moscow. Evidently, Ivan's guilt has driven him insane. This all stands in contrast with Ivan's theory. Ivan doesn't believe in God or virtue, and thus all should be permitted for him. Why then is he suffering with guilt? He should be proud that he was able to kill his father while keeping clean hands according to his theory. Smirnikov even points this out. "You used to be brave once, sir. You used to say, 'Everything is permitted, sir.' And now you've gotten so frightened." But there must be some external force that makes him feel this way, since obviously there is nothing intrinsic in Ivan's character that causes him this much guilt. Some force proves his theory wrong, but Ivan has done nothing as of yet to repent, and he is still not fully convinced. He isn't sure that Smirnikov is the killer, especially due to the mountain of evidence against Dmitri. He is still adhering to his theory despite his punishment. Part 4. The Battle for Ivan's Soul. Here, we will see Ivan being pulled in 2 directions. On the one hand, he can accept God and truth by repenting for what he's done and admitting it in court. On the other hand, he could adhere to his theory that all is permitted. But to accept God and to yield to all the punishment that he's received over the past 3 months is to admit that his theory was false. On the way to see Smirnikov for the 3rd time during a snowstorm, Ivan passes a drunken peasant in the street. The peasant sings, "Ah, Vanka's gone to Petersburg." Vanka is short for Ivan, so this reminds Ivan of his own decision to leave the town, and he gets furious. The man drunkenly lurches into Ivan as they pass, and Ivan shoves him to the ground where he remains motionlessly. Ivan thinks he'll freeze, and continues on his way. This shows that Ivan is still adhering to his old rationalist, atheist ideal of self-interest while on the way to Smirnikov. He has no love for his fellow man, and once at Smirnikov's, Ivan demands that he tell all. Smirnikov does just that. Quote, "Still, you are guilty of everything, sir, because you knew about the murder, and you told me to kill him, sir, and, knowing everything, you left. Therefore I want to prove it to your face tonight that in all this, the chief murderer is you alone, sir, and I am just not the real chief one, though I did kill him. It's you who are the most lawful murderer." Smirnikov then explains in excruciating detail how he planned and committed the murder, and all of his contingencies as well. It was highly premeditated. After this, Ivan is fully convinced of his guilt and resolves to go to court the next day and tell everything. Quote, "It's something physical," he thought, and grinned. It was as if a sort of joy now descended into his soul. He felt an infinite firmness in himself, the end to his hesitations, which had tormented him so terribly all through these last days. The decision was taken, and now will not be changed, he thought with happiness. So he wants to sacrifice himself for the truth. God demands that Ivan do this, and Ivan feels it in his soul. This contradicts his whole worldview thus far. It seems as if Ivan will be redeemed of his sins and will do what God demands of him. He rejoices in joy as he accepts God's forgiving embrace. He will reveal the truth and in doing so, renounce his old theories. On the way home, he stumbles over the peasant from earlier, who was still lying there in the snow. He decides to go out of his way to help the peasant get shelter and a doctor and pay for it all. This juxtaposition of how he treated the peasant from before to after his meeting shows his transformation into a new man. But then, he decides not to go to the prosecutor that night, but rather the next morning. Then, quote, strangely, almost all his joy, all his self-content vanished in a moment. Ivan then returns to his house. As he sits down, some icy, loathsome feeling oppresses him. He imagines that the devil is seated across from him. This visitor has come to him before. He looks like a regular middle-aged man, but it is the devil. Ivan is aware that the devil is simply the worst parts of himself. During this meeting, the devil will try to persuade Ivan not to go to court the next day, and thus to remain quote-unquote on his side. He does this by reminding Ivan of his old theories. He reads one of Ivan's old essays back to him, titled The Geological Cataclysm. In this essay, Ivan writes that we should destroy the idea of God in mankind so that mankind can live for joy and love in this world. Man will be exalted with the spirit of divine titanic pride, and the man-god will appear. Man, his will, and his science no longer limited, conquering nature every hour, will thereby every hour experience such lofty delight as will replace for him all his former hopes of heavenly delight. Anyone who already knows the truth is permitted to settle things for himself absolutely as he wishes on the new principles. In this sense, everything is permitted to him. Moreover, since God and immortality do not exist in any case, even if this period should never come, the new man is allowed to become a man-god, though it be he alone in the whole world, and of course, in this new rank, to jump lightheartedly over any former moral obstacle of the former slave man, if need be. As the devil reads Ivan's words, Ivan covers his ears and trembles. He throws a glass at his vision. In doing this, he believes that his vision was in fact real. Ivan is losing his mind. The vision ends as Alyosha knocks on his door with the news that Smerdyakov hanged himself. As Ivan raves madly to Alyosha, we see into his soul. He is deeply conflicted about whether to give in to his conscience or stick to his convictions. Quote, "Conscience? What conscience? I made it up myself. Why do I suffer then? Out of habit. Out of universal human habit over 7,000 years. So let us get out of the habit, and we shall be gods. Oh, you are going to perform a virtuous deed. You will announce that you killed your father, that the lackey killed your father at your suggestion. You are going to perform a virtuous deed, but you don't even believe in virtue. That's what makes you angry and torments you. That's why you're so vindictive." However strongly Ivan protests against virtue and truth, his punishment seems too great for him, and the decision may not be in his control. Quote, "You'll sit all night trying to decide whether to go or not, but you will go all the same, and you know you will go. You know yourself that no matter how much you try to decide it, the decision no longer depends on you. You will go because you don't dare not to." Ivan will go to court because God or his conscience demands it. He fears the punishment and guilt of not going, and he feels the warmth and joy of the truth. But as we see, this lack of free will is as painful to Ivan as his guilt. He is still resisting God as much as he can, and he is losing his sanity as a result. Eventually, Ivan talks himself to sleep. Alyosha looks over him and summarizes the ongoing battle between good and evil in Ivan's soul. Quote, "The torments of a proud decision, a deep conscience, God in whom he did not believe, and his truths were overcoming his heart, which still did not want to submit." "Yes," raced through Alyosha's head, which was already lying on the pillow. "Yes, with Smerdyakov dead, no one will believe Ivan's testimony, but he will go and testify." Alyosha smiled gently. "God will win," he thought. "He will either rise into the light of truth, or perish in hatred, taking revenge on himself and everyone for having served something he does not believe in." The next day, Ivan shows up in court. He enters slowly, and something in his face was, quote, resembling a dying man. After giving a regular testimony concerning his father's dealings with Dmitri, Ivan turns to go. It seems as if God does not have a hold on him after all, but then he turns back, chuckles, and says this. "I'm like that peasant girl, Your Honor. You know how it goes. I'll jump if I want, and I won't if I don't. They go after her with some sarafan or wedding skirt or whatever, asking her to jump so they can tie it around her and take her to a church to be married. And she says, 'I'll jump if I want, and I won't if I don't.' It's some folksy thing." Ivan wanted to leave, but he was then pulled back. He utters this phrase as a protest against God's demands. By saying he'll jump if he wants, he is trying to preserve his free will. It's as if he's saying to God, "The decision is mine, not yours. Even if I confess, all is still permitted." Ivan then presents the 3,000 rubles that Smerdyakov stole from Fyodor after the killing. Quote, "I got it from Smerdyakov, the murderer, yesterday. I visited him before he hanged himself. It was he who killed father, not my brother. He killed him and killed him on my instructions. Who doesn't wish for his father's death?" Here, Ivan is overcome by God, but only partially. He admits his deed, but does not admit to any wrongdoing. He then addresses the crowd. "A murdered father, and they pretend to be frightened," he growled with fierce contempt. "They pull faces to each other. Liars! Everyone wants his father dead. Viper devours viper. If there were no parricide, they'd all get angry and go home in a foul temper. Circuses. Bread and circuses. And me, I'm a good one." Here, Alyosha's prediction happens. He is taking revenge on himself for having served something he does not believe in. He projects his theory that people have no intrinsic love for each other on everyone in the courtroom, and everyone in general, and uses this to justify his action. Everyone wants their father dead. He is just living true to nature. The juxtaposition between God's demands on his conscience and his rationalist atheist theory produced this twisted confession. When asked who is his witness, Ivan concludes with this, quote, "He's got a tail, Your Honor. He's not up to form. Le diable n'existe point. He's sure to be here somewhere, there, under the table with the material evidence. Where else would he be sitting? You see, listen to me. I told him I would not keep silent, and he started telling me about the geological cataclysm. What rot! Well, set the monster free. He's begun his hymn, because he finds it all so easy. The same as if some drunken lout started bawling that Vanka's gone to Petersburg, but I'd give a quadrillion for 2 seconds of joy. You don't know me. Oh, how stupid this all is. Well, take me instead of him. I must have come for some reason. Why is everything in the world so stupid?" Finally, when Ivan almost gives in to God's demands and accepts his forgiving embrace, he instead remains with the devil. Ivan's attitudes towards God and his father are corollary. Ivan sees both as beings that did nothing but add strife to his life, and he wants them both dead. When he ends with, "Why is everything in the world so stupid?" it shows that he has lost any chance of coming to God in any positive manner. Evil won Ivan's soul in the Brothers Karamazov.